Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.
Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. With me this week is Josh Wurzer, Chief Compliance Officer with SC Laboratories. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Yeah, great to be here.
Excellent. Well, before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You can also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. Josh, I always like to get a little bit of background, understanding that you're the Chief Compliance Officer now, but how did you get your start in the cannabis industry?
All right. Well, so I graduated from college and moved right out to California. I was working in the pharmaceutical industry and then into the electronic materials industry doing research and development mostly. But I was always kind of tangentially involved in the cannabis industry on the side. I had a small grow at the time in California, and I was just a cannabis enthusiast, I guess, for lack of a better term. And, one day I was kind of thinking, well, maybe it's time to start looking for maybe the next job. At the time I was working at Samsung doing the electronic materials research and development. And, it's really interesting science, but really gnarly chemicals you're working with all the time. And just figured I was ready for something new but wasn't really serious about it. And so kind of the first night I was looking at job postings just to see what was kind of available in the Bay Area at the time. I came across this post, and this was like 2008. So there were no cannabis labs at the time. Nothing like this existed. And I saw a post for a lab director at an analytical testing laboratory, normal job post. And at the very end, it said, must be comfortable working with medical marijuana. And that line just really kind of caught my interest. And I was just really more so than anything curious about, what they were doing. So I stayed up late that night, updated my CV, sent it in, went to bed about 2 a.m, got up for work early. Went to work, and 9 o'clock in the morning, I got a call. Hey, can you come in today for an interview? And so I was, like I said, I just kind of interested in what was going on, went up on my lunch break. And that was actually Steep Hill Labs, which was the first lab in the United States or anywhere in the world that I'm aware of that would test marijuana or medical marijuana for the actual marijuana industry. And they had just sort of done all the pre-work to get the lab up and running, and they hadn't really been doing any testing yet, and they had lost their lab director. And so did a job interview there. They needed someone quickly, and they offered me the job on the spot. And at the time I thought, well, this isn't a real job. I can't ever put a job like this on my resume. It'd be career suicide. But this is really interesting. I'm not so happy with my job now. So why don't I take this job, and then I'll start looking for a real job, leave this off my resume. And and I guess here we are all these years later. So I did that for about a year, and I just thought it was a great idea. The lab itself at the time was run by cannabis people and in sort of cannabis industry people, cannabis activists, and they had a great idea, and they saw a need that needed to be met. But I felt that it could be done better coming from more of a science angle, building out a lab that looked more like some of the food testing labs or the environmental labs that that I was aware of. And so left Steep Hill to co-found SC Labs with 3 other partners. And we've been doing that since 2010. So we're in our 13th year right now.
In 2010, what was it like kind of making that leap, co-founding the business? And I mean, it sounds like really, putting a lot of it on the line for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of fun. I mean, it was very different back then. So there were no regulations for testing of any sort at the time. And for the first several years we were open, cannabis was still legal for medical purposes, but it wasn't recreational. So the people who were doing the testing were predominantly the dispensaries who were testing the products that came to them that they were putting on their shelves. And, back then it was voluntary. So the dispensaries were looking to do it just kind of for the good of their patients. And so it was sort of a different motivation for testing. We were doing it at the retail level. We're sort of inventing everything as we went along. There were no reference methods. Their AOAC didn't have any methods published for testing cannabis and cannabis flower. The only even literature methods we could really point to were forensics methods that were just looking for, detecting THC in a seized seized cannabis batch to put someone in jail or to prove that that the cannabis was actually cannabis. So no one cared about measuring the decarboxylated cannabinoids as opposed to the standard neutral cannabinoids. So we had to invent all of our methods. We had to develop all of our methods. We had to sort of kind of look at the market and see, well, what assays would be relevant to the different verticals in the cannabis industry. And so it was fun. The science was fun. We were sort of breaking ground. Everything we did was kind of being done for the first time. And so it was a lot of fun. We were able to, we did one of the first HPLC analysis of cannabinoids for commercial purposes. We developed the first LCMS pesticide assay in cannabis, first residual solvents test, one of the first terpene tests. So it was just a lot of fun. There wasn't, there aren't a lot of, chemistry jobs out there where you feel like you're actually breaking new ground anymore. And we were. And so, it was a lot of fun. And plus the industry itself was certainly a lot more colorful. There's a lot of characters and it's sort of still kind of in the gray area. And so you had just all different kinds of people and that were drawn to the industry at that time. And it was before sort of the corporations were able to come in. So, it was sort of the Wild West and it was a lot of fun. But, over the years, it's also been fun to kind of watch the industry mature and grow up and become what it is today.
I was going to say or ask, do you miss that sort of Wild West mentality, or is it with pride that you've kind of seen it grow up into more of a professional industry?
Yeah, I definitely miss it. I mean, it's kind of one of those things. Be careful what you wish for. We need this to happen. The industry is come to a really good place where people can make a living and put money in their bank account and sort of be above board with everything. But with that comes some trade-offs, and you've seen, like people coming into it for different motivations. Certainly people were always in the cannabis industry for the money, but sort of the nature of it back then was you also had to sort of be a little bit of an advocate and a little bit of an activist. And it was medical back then. So we were doing a lot more kind of really interesting stuff, testing products for parents who had kids who had severe epilepsy and things like that. And you felt like you're really helping people, and you could kind of see that because you were interacting with these people more. Now, our testing is moved up to more of a regulatory compliance, kind of niche that we're filling. And so we're testing further up the supply chain. We don't have as much direct interaction with the actual, people we're testing the products for, or even like the retailers like we did early on. So, so it's become sort of much more of a job than sort of a kind of a passion project like it maybe was early on in the days, but now actually making a living. So that's the big upside. So it's different. I do miss the good old days, but certainly where we're at now has a lot of advantages as well. But it was a lot more interesting, a lot more fun, and for kind of a weird turn of events is I felt like there was a lot less kind of talk of people falsifying test results or people pressing the lab to get certain results. We didn't have that early on. The people who were doing the testing were doing it because they wanted the test results. They wanted the right answer. Now where people are compelled to test, and so much of the value of their cannabis is dependent on those test results. The industry has a lot more issues with people pressuring labs to give them the results they want, and people complaining about the THC inflation and things like that. So there's been some downside to kind of the industry maturing, but certainly we're in a better place overall.
Do you still consider yourself like an advocate or activist?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and that's kind of what keeps me around and it keeps me sort of excited about the cannabis industry is there still are there's still a lot of battles to be fought in kind of progress to be made. Certainly we've come a long ways, but there's still people getting thrown in jail for cannabis in a lot of parts of the country. There's still kind of the case to be made for cannabis, but I think it has been really interesting to see. And, this has been a long enough of an arc for me where, I started when, the majority of the country still thought cannabis should be illegal, still thought cannabis was a drug and bad for you and can cause all these other, health problems when, and over the years, we've seen it kind of come to the public has sort of come to our side, and people realize that there's a lot of, benefits to cannabis, and it's certainly a lower harm alternative to a lot of the other kind of recreational drugs out there like alcohol or cigarettes or the illegal ones, and so like cocaine or things like that. So I think it being in this job, and certainly kind of where we sit in sort of the industry, you're an advocate, you're also kind of hold a position of sort of the technical experts in cannabis. So it's really fun to have, all the different producers come through and talk shop and try and, kind of, see what's going on or get some advice on this or that. So it's a really kind of also interesting vantage point to watch the rest of the industry progress.
As you were inventing new processes, did those become industry standard?
Yeah, a lot of them, certainly, we pushed very hard early on. A lot of people early on sort of mimicked, and that's what we did at Steep Hill, and certainly did it because the equipment's a little bit cheaper, but mimicked a lot of the early forensics assays. And so they were testing for cannabinoids with GCs, which GCs decarboxylate the actual form of the cannabinoids that the plant produces, which are the carboxylic acids, into the neutral forms, and sort of lump them all together because GCs use heat. And so early on, we advocated to use liquid chromatographs because they don't introduce heat, don't decarboxylate those carboxylic acids, and allow you to measure them as they actually occur in the plant. And so we were early advocates for that. That's sort of become the industry norm. We were big advocates for terpene testing early on. We saw early on that, if you're only testing the cannabinoids, people start just looking at that THC concentration and sort of attributing that as the main quantitative quality indicator of cannabis. And early on, we saw that happening and push for, kind of greater understanding of the terpenes and how they are actually, probably more important than cannabinoid concentrations for the sort of quality indicators of good cannabis flower. And so we pushed really hard for terpene testing early on, and as well as sort of, identifying which terpenes are the most important to be looking at. We did early microbiological testing in cannabis, and we were the first lab to do qPCR analysis of cannabis. So looking for the specific microorganisms that pose a threat to humans or can be pathogenic. And so, that's sort of become industry norm over the years. We were the first ones to do a residual solvent test in extracts. Right around the time we were founded is when butane extracts became really popular and dabbing became really popular. So we saw a need to be measuring the residual solvents and processing chemicals that are left over. That assay now is on, basically every panel in every state that requires testing. We were the first lab to do an LCMS analysis of pesticides. A lot of labs were kind of doing, ELISA tests or things that really weren't sensitive enough to look for pesticides in cannabis. And we were early advocates for a more sensitive pesticide test, since cannabis is inhaled and introduces a lot of other, kind of toxicity risks because of that. And so, that's become industry norm now. There's just kind of a lot of things we were able to sort of bite off and be the first to do and really push for. And early on, since we were one of the first labs, we were able to consult with a lot of states as they legalized and help kind of, drive those testing regulations in the various states where we were able to, in sort of where we saw is a common sense, direction, without, sort of adding a bunch of tests that would just tie handcuffs on the industry, but making sure that states put the assays and look for the analytes on those tests that were really important to, cannabis consumers. So, we've definitely been able to, over the years, I think, kind of set a lot of the standards or help assist people in setting those.
Is there any profitability to setting the standards? Is this proprietary stuff that you're able to license, or is it beyond being able to test for it and charge for it in your own labs? Is it kind of just a greater good sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, there's some things over the years that we probably could have put some effort into protecting. There's only so much you can patent in an analytical method. But there have been those things, but we've really not gone that route when it came to testing cannabis. We always kind of saw our role as more collaborative and contributing to the scientific body. Like I said, we got to do a lot of things for the first time, and we saw what we were doing is a benefit, not just essentially a money making kind of vehicle. So we tried to as much as we could to be collaborative with the other testing labs and the other cannabis scientists, and really try and bring up the testing industry. And I think over the years, looking back at it, that probably was beneficial. I think kind of not trying to protect everything and keep every assay we did for ourselves, or patent everything we did, has sort of progressed the testing industry in general, which I think has benefited us and all the other labs that are out there now. How much money there is in it, that's a whole different story. Testing is definitely not as high a margin as some of the other parts of the cannabis industry. And certainly the cannabis industry, as you look at it on a macro level across the country, is kind of been moving in fits and starts. So it hasn't been all roses. I think there's a lot of people that saw new industry cannabis. It's now legal. We're all going to make millions, and it hasn't been that easy.
Right. No, I mean, and you're right. A lot of people had that mentality, came into the industry, and kind of ran into a wall. One thing that I'm curious about is you mentioned that early on you didn't see that pressure on labs for trying to achieve results that would be beneficial for the operators. When did that change start? When operators started putting pressure on labs to help them out a little bit?
And we would get that once in a while, kind of like, well, how do I get this or that? But early on, also without any, no one would accredit us early on. Instrument manufacturers wouldn't even sell us instruments early on. We would buy used instruments. And so, kind of all we had was our reputation. So, it was never even a consideration for us. Otherwise, we were just giving people numbers on a piece of paper once you compromise that. And so, we would get kind of like, hints at that early on, and we'd have people try and send us send us samples, and that were clearly labeled something different, than what they were. And, you get that once in a while, and you'd have to call them up and say, hey, don't want to have to fire you as a customer. Stop this, so you get a little bit of that here and there. But by and large, and especially since we were testing for the dispensaries who were testing, products that they were considering vending, so it was sort of removed from, kind of the financial incentives. So we didn't get it very much, I guess, like I said earlier. But as soon as regulations hit, is when all of this started, and you started hearing of, labs that weren't passing people, or weren't, detecting pesticides, or didn't have a valid test, and that's a lot of that's gone away. Now what we see these days, is still some of that where people sort of know that they can go to this lab and they'll never fail a pesticide test. But more so what we see is kind of an overall inflation of THC results at a lot of labs, and sort of pressure to do that because those are the labs that become successful. It does seem like those labs then hit a certain scale and then realize, like, okay, well, we can't do this forever. And so as they get larger, that kind of self-corrects to an extent. But yeah, I mean, once regulations came in, every batch had to get tested. The people who maybe were so inclined to try and kind of get a result that they wanted were not testing with us in the first place. So that might be what it was too. But now everyone had to test. The stakes are really high. They fail a batch, the batch gets destroyed. If they have a low THC concentration, they're going to get half as much at wholesale. So there's just a lot more financial incentive for, kind of that, or financial, I guess, implications for each test. And so, that drives it. And then also too, it's not just, you hear a lot about THC inflation or kind of some of these issues being issues that regulators are working to tackle. And, it's different every state. Every state is, kind of does a different, it is strong in certain places and maybe kind of weaken their oversight of the labs in other places. But, I think it's not just labs cheating, for lack of a better word. A lot of times it's just, you have a lot of new labs. You have people that, were managing an Applebee's 2 years ago, saw the cannabis industry exploding and for whatever reason thought, well, I should open an analytical testing lab. And so you have a lot of people opening labs who don't necessarily have a background in analytical testing, which is just kind of a recipe for a lot of, kind of bad data. And so that's part of it too. You don't necessarily, I don't think if you weren't in the industry, you probably wouldn't say, hey, I'm going to open up an environmental testing lab. That sounds like a good moneymaker. But with cannabis, it was just, it was the gold rush. So everyone was trying to jump in and find their niche. And so you just had a lot of lab operators come in who didn't have a lot of experience. And so that, that's led to maybe, some, kind of bad data coming out, not, nefariously, just because, people are new to this. And so, that's been correcting itself too. And certainly like in a market like California, where it's a little bit more mature, we're kind of hitting that arc where sort of the laboratories that do good science, are sticking around, and you start to see some of the kind of laboratories that maybe just never caught up in regards to kind of their scientific acumen, maybe going by the wayside. And so I think, it's continuing to correct, and, 4 or 5 years from now, we might not even be talking about this anymore. I hope we're not, and so, it's just kind of the evolution of the testing industry.
Well, and it makes more sense when you talk about the example of, the manager of an Applebee's opening an analytical lab, because to me, it just seems so short-sighted for labs to put their integrity on the line just to appease their customers. It just is such a short-term play.
Yeah. I mean, but there again, the margins are narrow. Analytical testing, talk to, the environmental people who kind of saw that boom of all the environmental laws passing in the 70s and 80s, and then sort of the lab testing commoditized and kind of the margins being driven down. And we sort of had that same arc, but in a much more accelerated fashion. And so, and then you have, in California, the last time I checked, there was 60 some laboratory licenses, and that's, there's just a bunch of people that got into it as well. A lot of licenses that opened up shop. And so now, you just had a glut of testing, and it was so competitive, just to kind of stay in business. I think a lot of people probably took that route. We were lucky. We were in early. We developed a reputation for ourselves. And so we've always had, kind of a good share of the California testing market, just talking California right now. And, and so, and it's been a tough road, I know, for us. So, I can imagine, there's, people sink their life savings into a laboratory and things aren't going so well. And someone says, hey, I'll bring you all my tests. I'm a big customer, but I'm going to need we're going to need over 90% on all my distillates. And, I think, there's, and we're talking about this a lot, but, it's a handful of labs, there's 60 some licenses, and, I can think of off the top of my head, maybe 2 or 3 laboratories that I know, I still hear things about, kind of this regard. So it's a small number of the labs, but they kind of skew the whole industry, when, they start really, really cooking with, and so, it's not, I don't want to sound like it's a very widespread problem, but it is sort of kind of one of the more kind of existential problems facing the rest of us operators. But it's not, I don't think it's certainly not the majority. And I think it's probably a small minority of the laboratories that, that are still doing this. And so, I think the regulators are also getting better at figuring out ways to kind of have better oversight of the labs, better, surveillance of the operations, things like that. So regulators are getting better at reining it in as well.
Okay. As you started to expand outside of California, how did you choose where you were expanding into? How are things going in those new territories? And how have you managed to remain successful with such slim margins in the lab testing side of the business?
Okay, well, so the markets we've chosen to go in, it's sort of, there's been a number of factors. It's a combination of kind of opportunities in those markets. The last year or so we've been growing fairly quickly with, acquisitions. So, there's some sort of just kind of luck of the draw on what types of opportunities are available, in kind of reference to that particular lab, but also the markets we like are markets that are on the upswing, where, there's not kind of, an overabundance of other laboratories where there's, kind of a reasonable number of laboratories in the market. I think you don't necessarily always want to be the first to market in every one of these places, because things ramp up. So you get there first, or you get there too early, and you have all this sort of capital overhead costs, and but yet you don't have that revenue for a period of time. So I think there's a kind of a sweet spot to get in a lot of these markets. And kind of what we've seen in just general broadly in the overall market is that when legalization happens, there's kind of this roughly 5-year period of kind of an upswing in where production's increasing, overall revenue of the market is increasing, and then you kind of have this plateau where enough people jump in that you have overproduction, prices start to drop, wholesale prices start to drop, and then you have a little bit of a decline while the market corrects, and then you kind of settle into kind of a mature cannabis market, kind of like we have here in California or Colorado. Michigan, we're in Michigan, and it feels like they're still on that upswing, but they're kind of reaching that plateau. We're in Arizona. Arizona still feels like it's on that upswing, but I think kind of every market that we've monitored closely is sort of followed that trajectory. Okay. And then the second part of the question was, sorry, I lost it.
Yeah, the slim margins.
Oh, the slim. Yeah. So, I mean, we've actually looked a lot at like the environmental testing lab industry and how they survive that, because the kind of like I said, the trajectory is very similar, even though we've been sort of in an abbreviated trajectory, but it's continuously making method improvements, not just for accuracy, better sensitivity, more robustness, but also for greater efficiency. How can we do it better, faster, cheaper? Getting systems in place, continuously building our kind of software packages that help assist our workflow. Like in any laboratory, a LIMS system is sort of going to be kind of how your workflow happens. And we early on developed a custom LIMS system so we could more closely map our processes to be as efficient as possible and have the LIMS reflect that, rather than try and fit our processes within kind of the framework of an off-the-shelf LIMS system. And then as we've matured, we've built a staff that really is, I feel like, some of the best technical people in the cannabis industry. And I think, that's the real key to it is having staff members now that, have been testing cannabis for 7, 8, 9 years, and understand it, and, can really help kind of drive that growth, because as we've gotten bigger, we've needed more and more of those type of people who can really come in and set up a laboratory to be more efficient and kind of make sure that everything is running smoothly, because it really does kind of get to be kind of a, I guess, an analytical assembly line at some point, where you want to drive out any waste and just make sure your processes are as efficient as possible. And what that does is also drives accuracy and robustness, because the more you're kind of setting your processes up on autopilot, the more repeatable your results are, and the less chance for kind of deviation and errors to occur.
How do you guys determine internally to grow via acquisition versus growing organically?
Sometimes, that kind of, it depends on kind of what the lay of the land looks like, in a different market, in a particular market we want to enter. So, there's sometimes there's opportunities that just come your way that make sense. But if we're doing it strategically, I think you look at the market, you look, how difficult is it to get a license? Are there any potential acquisition targets out there, that kind of fit the bill, and then for what we're looking for, and and if you can do that easier than you can, build a de novo lab. You can, you can just move quicker. But the upside of building a lab from scratch is sort of you don't have to kind of come in and change things that are either broken or that you want to do differently. And so sometimes you come in, you acquire a lab, and you find out all the processes aren't compatible with what we're trying to do, or just need work, need development. And then now you have a staff that's used to doing it one way and has to do it another way. So you're kind of retraining all your staff anyways. And when you look back at it, you could easily say, well, it might have just been easier to do this from scratch. So it's kind of every opportunity, every instance is unique. But in general, I think there's certain markets that make the licensing process really streamlined. You can come in, you can get accredited, and you can start testing relatively easily. And then there's some markets where it's just so difficult to go through that process that it might be easier to just acquire a lab and go from there.
In your opinion, why is it important for cannabis brands to invest in testing during the R&D process?
Well, I think and I think we're seeing a lot more of that. And as brands become more mature, they realize that kind of the most important place to be testing is upstream. You want to characterize your product, you want to standardize your product, and you want to do that early in the process. So we help a lot of, and this especially goes for like infused product makers, people who are actually taking cannabis and turning it into something else. And so if you're going to be manufacturing a product, you want to have that product really well characterized and know kind of what your production variability is, how to standardize that product. So if I'm getting different starting material, different raw materials, in a seasonal product that may shift over the time, over the year, you might have to get different materials from different different producers. How do you standardize that product on the back end? And a lot of that goes also into and how you're characterizing that raw material. So we also have a lot of customers that do a lot of testing, qualifying all their inputs. And that way they can make smarter buying decisions. They don't have any surprises, down the line when they go to do their compliance test on, a batch that they've spent all this money extracting the materials, infusing them, say, into an edible or something like that. And then they go to test it. And now we failed for a, pesticide test. And especially with infused product makers, now they're not just considering their cannabis inputs, at least in markets that require finished product testing, their cannabis inputs, they need to consider all of their inputs. So a lot of what we've done is help people kind of track down the sources of their contamination. And infused products, you just have all these, kind of random places where contaminants can enter your material. So we had a big problem with anyone producing like lip balms or anything that had any beeswax in it, failing for a pesticide called Coumaphos. And we had, customers coming to us and saying, this is impossible. We tested the cannabis material inputs. This is organic beeswax we're using, and we're failing for Coumaphos. And what we found by tracking this down is that Coumaphos is a common miticide. Well, it's actually applied directly to bees from time to time to fight mites, but it's also sprayed on livestock. So what we found is that even organic beehives, it's really, really tough to control where the little guys fly. And you can't say, well, only fly to organic flowers. What they're doing is any beehive that's within 50 miles of a major livestock operation, the bees are picking up this Coumaphos from flying around the cattle. And so you not only need to source organic beeswax to make sure it's free from Coumaphos, but you need to source organic beeswax that's produced at a hive that's more than 50-mile radius from a livestock operation. And now our producers don't have that problem anymore, but it was a major issue. Or, early on when California first implemented heavy metals testing, it was the first state that implemented heavy metals testing. And it sort of came on, California did their testing regulation in tranches. So it was sort of the last tranche of testing. No one really was doing a lot of pre-testing. could have anticipated this if they had. But as soon as the requirement came on the market, now everyone was sending in all their vape carts for heavy metals testing, and they were all failing for lead because just all the vape carts in the market came from a couple different factories in China at the time, and they all had too high levels of lead in the actual cartridge. Shut down the cartridge market for like a month, and it just happened to be over Chinese New Year. So all these factories had been shut down, and then it took a while for them to spool back up, take the lead out of I think it was mostly in the wicks, take the lead out, and then it wasn't a problem. But until someone was actually looking and doing the testing and saying, hey, this is going to be a problem, you need to watch the lead content in these cartridges. No one cared, and and that whole time, what was the effect on the consumer? And so, and it was a great case for testing, but also a great case for, hey, test your inputs, test your materials, don't have any surprises when it comes time to test your final product.
How do you chase down that contamination? I mean, the vape example makes sense because it's fairly straightforward, but down to a 50-mile radius around pesticide treated cows, how did you run down that contamination?
Well, and like I said earlier, that's been the real fun part of the job, is sort of at the laboratory over the years through the kind of the evolution of the cannabis industry. Being in the lab is kind of been just a really cool kind of part of the industry to be able to kind of watch everyone do their thing. So you have everyone coming through and talking shop. Everyone wants to kind of pick your brain and wants to kind of share what they're doing. And so, we've gotten to kind of see all the big brands, all the big names in the industry kind of mature and help them along the way. And in part of this is, just kind of talking back and forth through this with different producers, trying to solve the problem and bringing little nuggets of insight here and there. And the Kumafos one was just kind of, research. We once it became an issue, we knew this was a thing. We started digging, some of our customers started digging and just kind of finding out that, where Kumafos is applied, how it's applied, and then, trying different things to, sampling different, different beeswaxes from different hives and questioning them on finding their location. Google Maps has been a big help in finding contamination because there's so much agriculture and a lot of this, we've been in Santa Cruz since the beginning in California. And so, a lot of this insight comes from our years in California, but there's so much other agriculture that we found out early that if you're going to try and produce cannabis, in California, especially like in the Central Valley, you just have to be really careful who your neighbors are. So we also do this thing where we've done a lot of testing for our customers environmentally. So we have a customer fails a pesticide test, keeps failing for a pesticide, it says, I don't apply this pesticide anywhere near my greenhouse. How am I continuously failing for this pesticide? Your results are wrong. So a lot of it is driven by, the desire to keep our customers, because, customer sends you a finished product of cannabis flower. You fail it for a pesticide they know they've never used. That's a customer that's going to be really difficult to keep unless you give them an answer, because they're going to look at you and say, this test is wrong. I've never used this pesticide. How am I failing for it? And why do I have to throw away my whole entire crop of cannabis? And so, this almost always coming from their neighbors, from drift. So we've gone out and taken soil samples surrounding different grows and sort of gridded it out. And in real easy, you can see where the soil is more contaminated with this pesticide. And you can kind of just point and say, hey, your contamination is coming from over there. You might want to go talk to those neighbors. And you can also pull heat maps. Pesticide applications are all supposed to be reported to the county, and you can get that data, and you can throw it on a heat map and kind of see what neighbors of that customer are spraying what and when, and track it that way. But kind of the best success we've had is just from doing soil sampling in a grid around the grow and just kind of pointing the arrow in a direction and having the person go talk to their neighbors.
I definitely understand the interest of that sort of investigative work, because it seems like every situation has something unique to it.
Yep, exactly. And microbiological testing it's very similar, very similar problem too. Why do I keep failing for aspergillus? I'm bleaching my walls, I'm bleaching this and that. And, either you can, watch them go to another lab that might not see it, or maybe that will too, but or you go on site and you start swabbing their surfaces, and you track it down. And so yeah, I mean it's it's actually one of the really fun things of what we do, for sure.
I understand the, I guess, natural ability to just want to blame the lab. Just like, well, we don't use this. It's got to be your fault. Has it ever been a contamination at the lab?
We've not, knock on wood, or I guess glass top, but we've never had we've never had a contamination or traced that a false positive or something back to contamination in the lab. It's certainly something we really control for. When they do pop up, we at one point had a microbiological contamination in our lab from some DNA that got set on on the top of a refrigerator, which was warm, and sort of aerosolized the DNA for a pathogen into our air, which shut down our micro lab for like a week. We had contamination. We had to move our whole micro operation to another lab, but it didn't affect samples. So contamination certainly can pop up. But certainly over the years, we've made mistakes, and in all laboratories, are run by people, and people make mistakes. And whether it's something as basic as two samples being switched or something like that. And so I think when those instances occur, it's really important to be forthcoming with the customer, forthcoming with your regulators, and sort of own those mistakes. I guess the natural inclination is when you make a mistake and it affects someone's test results, is to try and mitigate that or minimize it. But for better or worse, that's never been our approach. I think, again, kind of going back to what I said earlier, as a laboratory, so much of what you do is wrapped up in kind of the trust in what you're doing. Otherwise, you're just giving people numbers on a piece of paper. And so for us, I think just being straightforward with it, owning our mistakes, has always been the best policy. But but also, over the years, every mistake has sort of led to a corrective action, which is reduce the possibility for that mistake to happen again. So the other thing of that is take every mistake as an opportunity to better your processes, better your safeguards. And so over the years, we've developed systems and procedures to make it really difficult to make those mistakes. And I think that's kind of one of the advantages we have from our longevity, is we've made every mistake out there already, and so we've been able to correct for them as well.
A lot of it makes sense, testing during R&D and testing during production, just to make sure you catch things before before they go to the consumer. What are some of the benefits of working with MSOs, or MSOs working with labs such as yourself in multiple markets? Is it the standardization?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons, that we see a value in building a network across the country, because each one of these markets is almost like its own, it is its own market. So each of the markets are sort of walled off because you can't cross state lines. And so it's similar to kind of if you're, doing testing for, importing and exporting, where you have a lab at the export side of things and the import side of things, similar is we feel that, if we can put a lab in a lot of these major markets where MSOs are also operating, we can give them that standardization across the market. We can give them one platform to receive their test results on. They can manufacture their product, and say they're manufacturing in Oregon and they're moving to Michigan. They can just take one more sort of, variable out of the equation, and sort of being able to produce that product the same in Michigan as they are in Oregon. And a big part of that is their test partner needs to be giving them consistent results. And, that's a big thing is there's kind of two concepts. There's accuracy and there's precision. And so, we're all trying to hit the number right on the head, but also we want to give consistent results. So, as well, and that's your precision. And so we can offer that to these customers by having the same methods, the same procedures, in multiple markets. They know that, hey, I'm not going to have to sort of correct for the slight variations between my laboratory testing in this state and that state. So we see it as a huge value add. A lot of our multi-state operator customers, I think, would agree with us on that. And I think that's one of the big value propositions that we have now as a testing network, as opposed to just a couple laboratories.
Do you work with mostly MSOs or larger operators, or do you do work with mom and pops as well?
Oh yeah, still a lot of our business is mom and pops, and certainly the founders of the company, we're a much bigger company now that has much more parties involved. But all four of us founders came from the cannabis industry. Like I said earlier, all consider ourselves activists and advocates for the plant. And so, and the cannabis industry still, is, a lot of small operators, still a relationships business. And so we also see that as maybe more so than even kind of the size of our network is sort of the relationships we've built over the years and our connection to the plant. And so, when we talk to people, we're not just, people who came in and opened a lab, and we're not just the lab guys. We understand the plant, we understand the operators and their pain points, and we've built those relationships and that trust over the years as sort of, part of the industry, not just sort of, the lab.
One of the the primary reason I initially reached out to you was because I saw that you launched in partnership the Trust in Testing certification. I'm curious as to why you launched it, what you hope it'll achieve, and is it a solution to problems like lab shopping?
Yeah, and so we're not the only game in town. There's certainly other there's the standard accreditation that labs get and that are required for licensure in a lot of states, like ISO 17025 or TNI. These are different accreditations that laboratories get. But what we're designing is sort of an accreditation that kind of adds on those kind of base level accreditations, maybe adds a little something to the regulations in each state, and sort of standardizes sort of those best practices across the country. Because each state, like I said, has slightly different regulations, requirements, and there's blind spots in every one of these regulations. None of the states have it 100% perfect. And so having kind of the experience we have over the years, we partnered up with another large lab that has a lot of experience called ACT Labs. And, as laboratory operators, I think, no one is better positioned than us, and laboratory operators with a lot of experience, no one's really better positioned than us to fill in some of those gaps that ensure the quality and repeatability and all those things in test results. And there's others out there like ASTM that's offering a lab accreditation. It's great. It's super thorough. We just went through that process, and adding that to our list of accreditations. But for us, we thought there's still a need for, kind of a program that was developed by laboratories who know what we need to do to really put out quality results. And so, that's the goal. We have the standards in place. We're developing a mechanism by which it can kind of continue to run itself, independent of us. And set up the whole program so people can get accredited, that can get approved. The organization can continue to grow and adapt, but not with us sort of just being the drivers. The idea is just to sort of hand this off and let it run itself. Because also, as a laboratory operator, I'm not interested in kind of passing judgment on the other laboratories. So the goal is to remove ourselves from it outside of just being accredited as well, and being a part of the oversight as quickly as possible, and then just kind of hand it off and let it become its own thing. So we're excited about it, and we think it does add value, and certainly the requirements we see as such that if you can make it through the accreditation, you've demonstrated that you're one of the top-notch labs.
When you've noticed these blind spots in markets, are regulators open to fixing them?
Yeah, that's a load, bit of a load. It's different everywhere you go, so, the regulators are different in every state, and so, some states, yes, some states it's a little bit more, tricky. Certainly like big states like California have a lot more, it's a bigger ship to churn. And so, there's just kind of dynamics in each one of these markets, but California, I think by and large, also right out the gate, got it really right. It's just such a big industry to regulate. I think most of the issues that we would complain about in California are just because it's such a big job for the regulators. And in the laboratories, maybe, don't get it, that first attention that some of the other license types might, rightfully so. But I think, each state has kind of as positives and negatives, and that also includes kind of the accessibility and the responsiveness of the regulators. But I can say every regulator I've interacted with seems to be, just looking to continuously improve, understand that this is all really new still, and all these states are settling into their regulations, which gives which the regulators need to have the regulations established to be able to do anything. And so, and then it's also getting in the ear of the regulators, but also going further upstream and being active in some of this legislation as it's being made, introducing new legislation. We introduced a bill in California, or we didn't introduce it. Sorry, we helped sponsor it. A bill in California that would kind of add a few extra safeguards, give the regulators a little bit more teeth in regulating the labs, but it's relatively non-controversial. All the laboratories are behind it, and so if and there's always, if you're not happy with kind of the regulations as they are, there's certainly plenty of mechanisms out there to do something about it. You just have to put in the time.
It's been 13 years. Is that core of co-founders still pretty tight?
Yeah, I mean, four of us are still at SE Labs, and so yeah, I mean, we've been able to keep being friends and working well together as colleagues. And I think again, that's one of the secrets to our success is that we've stuck around, we've stuck with it, and we've got that long view. So many people in the industry are new to the industry, and come from other industries, and as these companies grow into larger and larger corporations and MSOs, a lot of new people come in, and it brings kind of a new perspective to the industry, and it brings kind of high performers to the industry that maybe wouldn't have considered it as a career previously. But it also it also means that there's a lot of people in the industry who are new to the industry and who maybe didn't get into it because they really liked cannabis or into cannabis and understood the product. And so I think our success has been that we were all in the cannabis industry in one way or another to some extent before we started the lab. And we've been there 13 years. And so we have that long view. We understand our customers, we understand their needs and their pain points. And we understand the plant. And so, that's been invaluable for us.
One of the things that you said you liked the most when you first got into the business was that it was a lot of fun. Is it still a lot of fun?
Yes. I mean, more money, more problems, I guess, but well, at least more problems. I'm waiting for the more money, but it is. It's a lot of fun, and I mean, every day is an adventure. It's probably not the greatest for my cortisol levels all the time, but there's never been a dull moment. There's still a lot of characters in the industry. There's still people who are in it because they care about the plant and they're activists and advocates. And it's certainly gotten to be more of a business, and it's maybe lost, the party's gotten a little less kind of exciting, but also at the same time, we're going bigger, and we're still doing new things. There's still products popping up on the market that really surprise me and are new and innovative. There's still kind of new markets to get into. So we're still growing. We're still, on the upswing. It's definitely different than it was, but in its own way, it's still a lot of fun for sure.
Josh, I really appreciate you taking the time today. Before we get out of here, is there anything else that you want to make sure the Cannabis Equipment News audience either knows about yourself or SE Labs?
Well, yeah, I think, just kind of leaving with the message that, I think the cannabis industry, there's still a lot of room for kind of scientific discovery in the cannabis industry. I think we still need more technically minded people, technically trained people to get in the industry and really kind of innovate. I think we're just scratching the surface on where we can go with cannabis, the cannabis plant, and cannabinoids as either medicine or just kind of for overall wellness purposes, and recreationally as well too. And so I see cannabis science programs popping up at universities and things like that, and I'm really excited because early on, it was kind of weird, but you kind of knew the handful of scientists that were working in cannabis, and there wasn't that many of them, and there's a lot more now, but I think there's a lot of work to be done. So, if you're, a young person and you're in college and you're kind of thinking what you can do, and you want to be a chemist or you want to be a biologist, and you're like, well, where can I still make a big impact? Where can I still, kind of go somewhere where someone hasn't gone before? Cannabis is still that place. So, I would, just say, there's still good work to be done here. And that's been, as a scientist, what's been exciting for me is doing new things and doing things no one's done before. And like I said earlier, there's not a lot of places you can do that, but you can still do that in the cannabis industry. So that'd be my parting message is, if you're a scientist, come on over. We could use you.
Josh, an amazing parting message. And thank you again for joining me, man. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
All right. Well, before we get out of here, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You can also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com. Also, subscribe to our daily newsletter and make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. For Josh Wurzer, Chief Compliance Officer at SC Laboratories, I'm David Manti. This is the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.